Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Burt Grinstead and Anna Stromberg's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde 2-actor version. So as the title suggests, this is a play basically with 2 actors, originally performed by Grinstead and Stromberg themselves. Player 1, Grinstead in the original production, played Jekyll and Hyde. Player 2, Stromberg, played Poole, Utterson, Lanyon, Sarah, Excited Woman, Dr. Carew, Madame Carew, Officer, Enfield, Maid, Little Girl, Woman, Old Man, Old Woman. So somewhat unequal distribution of parts here. But that actually becomes part of the comedy. Yes, by the way, I should have mentioned this is a comedy. Because apparently that's a thing that makes sense to do with The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I've been reading a lot of theater adaptations of Jekyll and Hyde, and a lot of people want to make it a comedy or a farce or something along those lines. So, you know, it is what it is. But there are times in this play when the actors sort of draw attention to the fact that virtually everybody was played by Stromberg. For instance, there's a point at which Jekyll says that it's difficult to tell 2 of the other characters apart. The 2 specifically, I think, are Sarah and Madame Carew, but I'm not 100%. I don't 100% remember. And then actor 2, who plays both Sarah and Carew, and therefore they look very similar, gets indignant and sort of steps out of character to make a remark about how they are quite distinct. And then shortly after that, there's another moment where the second actor leaves as Poole, who's Jekyll's butler, and returns as Utterson, who's Jekyll's lawyer and friend, and comes back with part of Poole's costume still on, and Jekyll sort of points to the part of Utterson, to the part of Poole's costume that's still there, at which point actor 2 sort of rips it off and throws it. So there are some moments in which that becomes a source of interest, a source of humor. The play is okay. I'm actually not a huge fan of this play. I think maybe if I saw it performed, it would be more interesting, because I think a lot of the humor really derives from the timing. A lot of times in this play, the humor seems to derive from characters talking over one another, or from the quick changes that actor 2 needs to make. And so reading it, it's not hilariously funny. I do think there's some interesting bits, though. There's a lot of changes from Stevenson's novel. This is like every other stage adaptation I've encountered so far. This has very little to do with Stevenson's novel as such. One of the things that is similar is still this question of good and evil and of dividing the self. The character of Henry Jekyll as the scientist who uses a potion to split off Edward Hyde, that's still there, but beyond that it's very, very different. Jekyll has extended interactions with Sarah, who's a woman who is... It's more that she's courting Jekyll than that he's courting her, because he doesn't really seem especially engaged with it. where she seems to be the main driver. Jekyll seems to have a much more direct relationship with people like Lanyon and Dr. Carew, because in this version they all work at a university together, which is not the case in the novel. And the murder of Carew is quite different here, because in the novel, I actually think the murder scene in the novel is kind of a great one, because we see it from a distance, basically from the perspective of this maid who's looking out her upstairs window, and Hyde beats Carew to death for no particular reason. That's the thing that emphasizes his evil in the novel, is that it is an arbitrary murder, entirely so. Like, Carew was literally just like, hey, it's a nice evening. I'm a nice old dude on the street, and you're a dude on the street. Let's exchange some pleasantries. And Hyde is like, my pleasantry is I will beat you to death with my stick. Here, it's quite a different situation. We have both Dr. Carew and Madame Carew. Hyde has seduced Madame Carew. Dr. Carew comes to the hotel room that Hyde was having an affair with her in, and he says he's going to kill Hyde. And so, in a way, this is self-defense, I guess. But it's a much more justified set of violence than we have in the novel. The thing that I do find interesting in this scene, though, is actually this other set of ideas that gets brought into this particular play, that while you could read it into Stevenson's novel, I don't see it there. I don't see Stevenson evoking this set of ideas. And this is the sort of Nietzschean idea of beyond good and evil. This idea of that the Übermensch, that the superior man is no longer limited by conventional morality. And so that idea actually comes up several times in this play. This play, of course, being a post-Nietzschean play, first performed in 2018, so well post-Nietzschean. But one of the things that Hyde says before he attacks Dr. Carew is, formalities are only an illusion of respect, a waste of time, a gutless attempt at creating equality among the weak. And that's a very Nietzschean idea, because one of the things that Nietzsche talked about is how life is about seizing on one's desires, it's about seizing on one's power or ability, and it is conventional morality, Christian and Jewish morality, that limits people's ability to do this. So Hyde is here making the same critique. But the reason that this particularly sounds Nietzschean, because this could just be an arbitrary connection. But earlier in the play, Jekyll is presenting his ideas, and they've been rejected by the university. He's presenting them in terms of separating out humanity's good and evil portions. And what Sarah says is, not everything is good and evil, Henry. You're a slave to the rules set by people like my father, like all of them out there. There's no truth in that. So that's an interesting one, because that's a very Nietzschean idea. Nothing is good and evil. Nietzsche famously has a book called Beyond Good and Evil, and it literally is about transcending these ideas of conventional morality that tell you you should do particular things that are good because they are in themselves good. And then this idea, you're a slave to the rules set by people like my father. This is another very, very Nietzschean idea, because one of the things that he talks about is how Judaism and Christianity especially are slave morality. That is, they accept and even glorify suffering rather than embracing life forces, life energy, in the way that Nietzsche imagined that, for instance, Roman paganism did. So this idea of being subservient to conventional morality and limiting oneself, one's ability, one's achievements based on that morality is a very Nietzschean thing. But then we also get this next point, because Jekyll says, the truth is that we're slaves to base desires. And that's more of a Freudian point. I mean, Freud would come along and say, basically, human beings function on instinct, we function on desire, we function on these drives that we don't fully understand and are not fully in control of. And Jekyll is here making the same argument. But what Jekyll thinks is that we can split the human mind so that the drives, the instincts, the things that would push us to do negative stuff can be separated out, and the rational, good human being can be isolated. But then we get this next thing, this next philosophical idea in quick succession in this conversation. So Jekyll says, I believe we can shake that. That's base desires. And Sarah says, why would you ever want that? Jekyll says, because, and he holds up the book he's reading, which is a book about chimpanzee psychology. He says, because we're not monkeys. Sarah says, no, we're not, but we're still animals, aren't we? And Jekyll says, we don't have to be. Sarah says, yes, we do. Is what makes us human, and I happen to enjoy being human. Now, what's striking about this is it's a Darwinian point. So, I mean, one of the things that confronted Victorian ideas about the world in Darwin's work was the idea that human beings are animals, that we are not separate from the rest of animal species. This was something that, because the Bible says that humans were created distinctly and separately from animals, Victorians, this is what I think it's Carl Sagan calls one of the great demotions of humanity. This idea that we are not as special as we like to think that we are and have traditionally been taught by especially Abrahamic religions. So that idea that we are animals is a central Darwinian idea. And we also have a reference to that earlier, because Lanyon, who is Jekyll's boss in this version at the university, when they start talking about the behavioral psychology of chimpanzees, which is the book, Lanyon says, surely you're not saying we're similar to monkeys, Jekyll. Now, this play is set in the 1860s in London. Darwin's ideas would be circulating, and while there would definitely be some scientists and whatnot who were not on board with Darwin by this point, Darwin had a lot of credibility. I mean, the idea that Lanyon would just completely dismiss the idea of an evolutionary connection between humans and chimpanzees, it's not necessarily entirely anachronistic, but it's a little bit odd. But of course, Lanyon in this version, as the person who rejects giving Jekyll the funding that he wants to do his research, Lanyon is supposed to somehow stand for like the old guard and the people who can't sort of envision the future of science. And yet, at the same time, the future of science posited by Jekyll is this sort of monstrous thing in which he loses control over his ability to limit self-gratification.